Is this the right defense to be running? I mean, we just talked about it. He's never had a number one defense. He's never won the Super Bowl. He's, you know, we
No,
got the guy
don't
that made the defense, but
look.
if the defense isn't the right defense, well, who cares? Welcome back in, everybody. A Monday edition of Birds 365, preparing for just 1 week away from Eagles OTAs, 2 days away from the schedule release. So we'll be able to see when and where the Eagles are playing all their opponents. But Johnny Mack and I have been waiting to talk defense. We're going to get into the Vic Fangio defense, the versatility, why it's not a 3-4, as Johnny Mack likes to say. John, let's start with linebackers, though. The traditional linebackers in football are Sam, Mike, and Will. What's the role of the linebackers in this defense? I know it's obviously changing depending on the situation, but just roughly, what's the role of the linebackers in this defense?
Well, you have all ball linebackers, which are the Mike and the Will, and then you have an edge rusher in this particular defense, which would be the Sam. You know, it's ironically so. You know, people get caught up in the labels. 3-4 is just personnel. Obviously, 3 defensive linemen, 4 linebackers. Which, if you use your head, when point to me, when do the Eagles have 4 linebackers on the field in 2023, 2024 football? They don't. They never have it on.
No, their linebackers aren't good enough, even if they wanted to do that.
So, basically, what people are doing is they're labeling personnel. And even that's incorrect from the standpoint of who's out on the field. So, with the linebackers, Nakobe is penciled in to be the Mike linebacker. Devin White is penciled in to be the Will. And then, interestingly, the Sam linebacker would typically be, that would have been Hassan Reddick's role on the line of scrimmage. And the Eagles listed him as a linebacker. It will now be Bryce Huff's role. To give you an example of labeling means nothing, if you go on their website, they'll list Bryce Huff as a defensive end. So it doesn't matter.
But for the benefit of clarity, the Mike linebacker is a middle linebacker.
Yes.
Kobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter. The Will linebacker is your weak side linebacker, and that would be Devin White, for example.
Yes.
And then the Sam is the strong side linebacker. And in this system, it's technically your edge rusher. It's Bryce Huff, Hassan Reddick, right? So that's the clarity of breaking down the Sam and the Mike. And
and strong side versus weak side. Right. Usually you flip depending on the formation, and that's the difference. And Devin White has versatility. He's played Mike before, but right now, if you're projecting where the Eagles are going to go, at least to start, Nakobe's going to get one more chance to lean that down. Now, Vic brought up Zach Bond. So if Nakobe Dean doesn't play well, they could move Devin White to middle linebacker and play Zach Bond if he thinks Zach Bond can play weak side linebacker. Jeremiah Trotter, I've been told, will start off in the middle as well. So they believe he's a legitimate middle linebacker.
He looks like that to me. Now, like I said, I don't profess to know everything.
Well, you don't look like his dad.
No, but I'm saying he has the build of a just when you look at him play, he's not a fast edge rusher like Hassan Reddick. He's
no. He's not. Yeah. He's not going near. It's either middle or weak side for him. They're completely different positions, and the best way to understand this, even though they're all linebackers. The off-ball linebackers, the stack linebackers, the guys who play off the line of scrimmage, all meet together with Bobby King, who's the new linebackers coach. The edge rushers, so no matter what the term you want to use for them and what they're listed on the website, they all meet with Jeremiah Washburn. He's the edge rushing coach, essentially. So they don't even meet with the same position coaches. That's how different those particular positions are, even though the Sam linebacker is called a linebacker. He meets with the edge rushers. And a better indication of that would be Hassan Reddick, who just left, worked with Jeremiah Washburn. And guys like Patrick Johnson or Nolan Smith, who are listed as linebackers. They meet with Jeremiah Washburn. Now, to further conflate things, sometimes there's injuries. And there are certain guys more equipped to play off-ball linebacker, like Patrick Johnson was forced to do at certain times last year due to injury, like Nolan Smith did at certain times due to injury. But that's not, sometimes that's like Avonte Maddox moving from cornerback to safety as a rookie. Eagles didn't want to do it. They just had so many injuries they had to do it. So, once you get down to 53, you do need some versatility. And there's some guys who are, and it's generally the lighter guys that can move back and forth between the two positions. But for our purposes, look, the Eagles have multiple fronts, 50 fronts, which are 5-man fronts, odd man fronts, 40 fronts, which is the typical Jim Schwartz 4-man rush.
Right.
And they will toggle back and forth. Generally, when it's 1st and 10, the Eagles will run what is called a tight front, a TITE, not TIGHT, a tight front, where you have a nose tackle, Jordan Davis. You have 2 defensive ends or interior defensive linebackers, defensive linemen, who play 4-eye technique, which is inside shade and the 4 gap. And that would be Jalen Carter and Milton Williams. And then you have the weak side edge rusher, who's Josh Sweat, a strong side edge rusher, which would be Bryce Huff. And then the middle linebacker and the weak side linebacker. That is generally what the Eagles will play and have been playing. It will not change under Vic Fangio because they've been playing Vic Fangio's system for 3 years. Occasionally, it will turn into a tough front, which is TUFF. And that just means the backside A gap is Jordan Davis's role. So it's just a little bit of a tweak in Jordan Davis's responsibility. Those are their 2 sort of base 1st and 10 looks. From there, depends what happens. If it's 2nd and 10, they might keep that group out there. Or if they want to rush the passer and they're pretty confident that because it's 2nd and 10, they're going to send out their 40 front, where all of a sudden Jalen Carter turns into a 3 technique. Huff and Sweat are going to be back on the field. And then depending on whether it's Jordan Davis, he'll play a shade technique, or if they want more of a pass rush, it'll be Milton Williams, who will play dual 3 techniques with Jalen Carter. You could have Brandon Graham in there. There's a host of different ways you can go. So it toggles. And 3rd and long, 3rd and long, you're going to have that 4-man group, your best pass rushers on the field. And then the secondary, that's where you're going to see the change. You're going to see a nickel back. You might see a big nickel with 3 safeties, whether it's, excuse me, Cooper DeJean or Sidney Brown. So it's a very, and Vic said, it's a very versatile defense. It's designed to adjust and morph. And that's why if you call it a 3-4, first of all, it's technically incorrect. It's any way you want to look at it, it's incorrect because they don't play 4 linebackers ever in 2024. It's not a 4-3 either. So whether you want to call it a 5-2 to start, whether you want to call it a 4-2-1 when they have the nickel in there, whatever you want to call it, it's just the label anyway. I wouldn't get caught up in it. But that's the way the Eagles play defense under Vic Fangio. And it's been the way they play defense under Jonathan Gannon and Sean Desai.
I think the confusion comes where linebackers are being called linebackers, but they're rushing the passer on the edge.
Yeah.
And that's where I think people are maybe, not guys like you, but guys like me, guys that are, not football savants when they hear defenses and they're trying to learn everything and they're trying to hear the breakdowns. Hassan Reddick to me was not a linebacker. He was an edge rusher. Go
He
get the
wasn't.
quarterback. Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't.
But and I'm saying in the packages though, in the how they're, presented, he's technically a linebacker.
Yeah, I get it. And that's why I said don't get caught up in labels. I mean, and
Yeah.
and the NFL is part of the problem because if the Eagles listed Hassan Reddick as a linebacker.
Yeah.
Now they list Bryce Huff as a defensive end. You know why? Because Hassan Reddick came into the league as a linebacker and Bryce Huff came into the league as a defensive end. So it never changes, no matter what they play. In the case of Hassan Reddick, it changed. Now you got a guy playing the exact same position who can go on the Eagles website today. Bryce Huff is replacing Hassan Reddick. They list him as a defensive end. Doesn't matter. If people want to get caught up in that, you're not going to understand the whole philosophy.
Right.
The label of the position and the description, that's why I say, even offensively, people are more familiar with the terms 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel, even 10 personnel, even 21. References how many receivers are on the field, how many tight ends, how many running backs at times. You could play a 12, which is 2 tight ends, but you have a complete flex tight end who's doing the same role as a slot receiver, but it's described as a different personnel grouping.
Yeah.
Because one guy's labeled a tight end and one guy's labeled a receiver. Well, that tight end may never block in his life, and he's just a bigger slot receiver.
Right.
He's playing the same role.
I think the thing that and Shonoff points this out in the chat. There's a lot of contracts that are based on labels.
Yeah,
And then
that's part of the
you see that's why Mike is mad, right? Because now they want to pay him like a linebacker, and he's really an edge rusher.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem, and players have to fight that fight, and the NFLPA has to fight that fight, and that's why certain teams will do what they do from a contract standpoint. Wide receivers make more than tight ends. So a couple years ago, there were certain tight ends trying to push for the fact that they were playing more receiver. Kyle Pitts would try to, he's more of a receiver. Defensive ends, outside linebackers. Now, it's interesting because it doesn't affect the NFL is so backward when it comes to franchise tags, for instance. They don't differentiate between edge rushers and off-ball linebackers. So the edge rushers get paid, the off-ball linebackers generally don't. But they all get mixed in together if they're labeled a linebacker. So yeah, from a contract standpoint, that's a fight the NFLPA should try to get better defined. From Vic Fangio's standpoint, he doesn't give a shit about that. It's about who's playing where and what their role is. And the Eagles' roles are clearly defined. Now, there's a lot of people who think they're playing a different defense, a different defensive scheme. I don't know why. I got it during Jonathan Gannon's first year. They were still playing big scheme, but they didn't have Jordan Davis and they didn't have Hassan Reddick. So they didn't play the 5 front, the 50 front as much as they typically would have. They didn't have those players. So
why do people then, John, and you obviously might know the answer to this better than I would. Why do people say then Vic Fangio is going to run a 3-4 defense? If we're not changing, where did it come from? It came from somewhere.
Laziness? I don't know. Again, point to me the 4 linebackers. At any point, even if you want to be technical about it, like I used to have these arguments with Jody. Jody used to like to win arguments on technicalities. Now with Hassan Reddick, you had 1, if you want to call him a linebacker, which he's not. But even if you're trying to win the argument on a technical standpoint, you still only get the 3 linebackers because they listed Josh Sweat as a defensive end.
So in a 50 front, could a 50 front technically be looked at as
It's an odd man front? Yeah.
But I'm saying a 3-4 because the two other linebackers are the edge rushers on the outside. Maybe it's Bryce Huff and Josh Sweat.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
your 2 linebackers are
Well,
that's
there's no real difference between an old school 3-4 that, say, the Pittsburgh Steelers back in the day, other than, their linebackers basically. What Vic did to tweak it is he calls it gap and a half. So typically in the old school 3-4, you would have the base ends play 5 techniques. So they were outside, essentially the shoulder of the right tackle, left tackle. They're inside more in Vic's tweak of the look. And you had the 2 outside linebackers who would rush the passer along with the traditional stack linebacker. So that's where it comes from. But even that is not, he changed it, and he changed it. What he's trying to do, and Ben Solak is the best one. So steal from Ben. It's all about one guy. It's all about it's sort of like the quarterback in the running game. We always talk about the +1. It's all about the getting +1 in coverage, getting the extra guy in coverage.
Right.
And that's what big scheme is about. And he's tweaked it to play. So everybody has gap and a half, not the old school 3-4 would be 2 gaps. He calls his gap and a half. You have a primary responsibility and a second responsibility. And the whole goal is to make sure you don't need a safety to come back, to come down in the box for run support, because you should be able to handle it. Everybody's got their gap responsibility. You should be able to handle it if you execute it in Vic's defense. That's the only difference. But it's an odd man front. It is not an old school 3-4. It is variable. It will morph from, again, that 5-man front to a 4-man front. And if you're playing well defensively, you're going to have many more snaps with 4-man fronts than 5-man fronts, because you're going to force the other team to throw the football.
Right.
And you're going to be in the more traditional pass rushing look without the big nose tackle in there.
Is this fair to say? Shonuff points out more than likely our base will be big nickel.
No, it probably won't be big. Big nickel means 3 safeties.
3 safeties, right?
That will not be their base defense. Their base defense will be that 5-man. And by base, I mean, again, what's your definition? My definition of base is what you play on 1st and 10.
Right. I think that's my definition. I don't know what everybody else.
Other people say, what do you play most? What do you play most is nickel in the modern NFL. The Eagles will be in that tight front or that tough front on 1st and 10 more often than not. Now, if Jordan Davis gets hurt, that might change. But as long as Jordan Davis is there, they'll be in that look more than anything else. And if in that look, you'll either have the 2 linebackers out there, which projected to be Nakobe and Devin, at least today, 2 corners and 2 safeties. Now, if somebody comes out in 11, and most teams do, and they're legitimate receivers, you're probably going to have your nickel back on the field. So it's still nickel more than 2 linebackers. And then when you start talking about big nickel, I think my assumption of the Eagles are going to play more big nickel is about their weakness at linebacker. I don't think that's
you have talent, more talent at
yeah,
safety, get them on the field versus weak linebacker,
yeah.
not
I don't think he'll go into it saying, "I want to play big nickel." I think he'll go into it saying, "This is my better player,
right.
and I'm gonna get
I want to get this
yeah,
guy on the field, which means
yeah,
I have to run this package.
exactly."
So what if you're in big nickel and you say you have 3 safeties on the field? What exactly does that mean? Where are the 3 safeties playing?
Well, one safety is essentially playing linebacker. So again, it's
Right.
label. It's labeling. Like Sidney Brown's going to be playing linebacker. Like Malcolm Jenkins used to be a big nickel player for the Eagles and would move down and essentially play linebacker. You're just having a safety playing the linebacker role. Um, and you can get away with it a lot more in the modern game because people do not take advantage of it and say, all right, Sidney Brown's going to be on the field. We're going to try to run the football. Some teams might occasionally. And if they do that, you'll probably get out of it quickly. But most teams are not disciplined enough to do it. And you try to take advantage of that. Obviously, a chess game, but I think because of the Eagles' weakness in linebacker, I think you're going to see more big nickel this year.
Which makes it harder for the opposing team to throw the football effectively,
In
correct?
theory. In
theory. Duh,
Yeah.
that's all. It's all in theory.
Yeah.
So if Sidney Brown is playing, if we're in big nickel and Sidney Brown's on the field and he's technically speaking, I guess you could say, playing linebacker, he's obviously not rushing the passer. He's covering,
playing
he's in
off
coverage,
ball
right?
Yeah.
Off ball linebacker in coverage.
Yeah. Yeah. And Vic will drop flat defenders, which people get upset about. So that's edge rushers dropping to cover the flats.
Can you give the scenario for that, please? What's the scenario in the game where edge rushers dropping into coverage? When would the Eagles do it? And B, when does it make sense to do it?
That's dropping an edge rusher is simply a curveball. You're trying to confuse the quarterback. You're trying to, it's not a designed, oh, I want to get this guy in coverage.
Right.
You're trying to give the quarterback a different look. You're trying to confuse him, trying to fool him. He doesn't expect him to drop, and all of a sudden he drops and somebody else comes. Dom Capers would call it a zone blitz. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a designed. I think people misunderstand that with Hassan Reddick. And when Sean Desai did it, and Jonathan did it, and Matt Patricia did it, they're not doing it because they think, hey, he's good in coverage.
Yeah,
they're doing it to confuse the quarterback. It's a curveball, basically. And that's a feel of the coordinator.
Get McMullen a whiteboard. Johnny Mac, we're in the weeds. I love it. Get McMullen a whiteboard. Shout out to Ross and Found.
That's just trying to, again, throw that curveball. I would have this argument with Elliot Shore Parks all the time. And he's like, you can't drop Hassan right. I'm like, does Nolan Ryan throw 100% fastballs? No.
Right.
You have the best fastball in the world. If you keep throwing them, the best hitters are just going to gauge you up and you got to throw other stuff. And that's what a defensive coordinator does with stuff like that.
Confusing defense. I mean, if you're not.
Oh, well, that's part of the issue as well.
And this is where we talked about it with some of these young guys. I mean, having veterans on this defense is going to help.
Well, and we haven't even gotten to the coverage. The coverage is designed to always have split safeties pre-snap. So the quarterback is looking pre-snap at 2 high safeties. And then post-snap, you spin off into the coverage called. And
so wait, real quick, before you elaborate on this, can the coverage on the back end be completely independent? I guess it wouldn't, no way. But for the sake of the question, could it be independent of what front you're running on the front end of the defense?
No, if it is, cover and rush, rush and cover, as JG would always say.
Right.
Everything is
Doesn't work.
designed to be on the same page. Now,
So a certain
often,
front, a tight front or a tough front, as you explained earlier, would mean they would do something specifically on the back end. They couldn't do a variation of things.
well, no, I mean, they can run any coverage they want off a tight front or a four-man front, when they change. I mean, their coverage, but everybody's aware of who's on the field, or everybody should be aware. So, you know, the majority of VIX coverages are going to be zone. It's going to be quarters. It's going to be the main cover 4. You're going to see cover 6. You're going to be cover 8. There's going to be mix and match zones. So match zones where essentially it looks like man coverage, but it's really not. And this is the problem with VIX defense. There is a lot of opportunities for blown coverages for lack of communication on the back end.
Theodore Nicholas, this is a great point. Communication will be the deciding factor.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Now, if you guys are on the same page, as you've seen some of his Chicago defenses, San Francisco, even Denver, it could be pretty special. But you can also see blown coverage. You even saw it in the Super Bowl. With Andy won 2 Super Bowls with the same play, confusing the defense.
And he burned us with it twice in the same 2 back-to-back drives, I think it was.
And that's just guys blowing coverages and not communicating. So it's not easy. But the whole point of the coverage scheme is to have those 2 make everything look the same pre-snap. So the quarterback has to digest quickly post-snap what coverage it is. And that, in theory, the theory is that slight hesitation makes it easier for the defense to succeed. I like the fact that Vic essentially said, when he was asked about some of the most important elements of his defense, he started with good players. It's like any other
smart players too. You need smart players in this defense.
Yeah. To me, it doesn't matter, but also what I like about Vic is he said, when things go bad, he's not scheming you out of it. You're going to go back to basics. And that might be that might be just quarters coverage, bang, 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 over and over again to get people to settle down in the foundational principle. But it can be complicated. And that's one of my biggest concerns when we talked leading up to the draft. I was like, I don't necessarily like young cornerbacks in this particular defense. There's going to be some learning curve.
Which is where I think advocating for Bradbury might make sense. John, I want to hit this super chat from James. Send us $20. James, we appreciate you as always. You're a big contributor to JAKIB Sports, and all your contributions are very much appreciated. He says late here, but has Johnny Mac mentioned how Vic, and he meant mishandled, mislabeled, not mishandled. Mislabeled the 3-4 because they count creepers as Sams. I think he means Sams there, and vice versa. But in Vic's world, not creeper. It's a 4-front disguised, and strong edges drop the hook flat to stop high-low.
He plays it well. The flat defenders we talked about, that's when he drops, whether it's going to be Bryce Huff or Josh Sweat or Nolan Smith or whomever is playing the edge, he'll occasionally throw the curveball, and that's that flat defender.
Right.
And, Andrew Van Ginkel did a hell of a job at that in Miami last season, as an example. It remains to be seen if they find a player who excels at that type of role, or if he leans towards, if Huff and Sweat aren't good at it, he might just put it in his back pocket a little bit more often. He might not use it as well. I really think people got to just forget about 3-4, 4-3. He uses 50 fronts. He uses 40 fronts. He uses them both. They'll start with the 50 front, as it becomes more of an obvious passing situation, it'll be a 40 front. And it toggles back and forth. This whole defense is versatility. This whole philosophy is based on being able to play both, so you can defend the run while keeping that extra player in coverage. Again, it's +1. It's the +1 of defense versus the +1 of offense. The whole system is designed to keep the +1 in coverage because that's what the modern NFL game demands. For those people who say, is there going to be and I've gotten this a lot, is there going to be a safety dropping down? He doesn't want a safety to drop down. That's the last thing he wants. He wants two high safeties until you spin off. But as far as people mislabeling, that has to do with the labeling of the players. Again, the Eagles called Hassan Reddick a linebacker because he started and he was drafted as a linebacker mistakenly, I might add, by the Arizona Cardinals. So he's always a linebacker. Bryce Huff is now a defensive end. They're going to play the same damn role. So who cares?
Is it fair to wonder if, and maybe I'm completely wrong. Is it fair to wonder if the overcomplication of the defense is necessary? I mean, is that maybe that's just the NFL? It has to be this complicated.
No, well, more teams. Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Nick Sirianni, Kevin O'Connell, Matt LaFleur. I'm probably leaving a bunch out. The reason Vic's defense became the defense in the NFL is all those offensive guys think it's the most difficult defense to deal with. And when they got head coaching jobs, they essentially wanted defensive coordinators that were going to run his scheme.
What percentage of the NFL is running this defense?
It topped out at 12, I think, 2 years ago. And then a bunch of teams had problems.
Well, because I think the biggest problem with the defense is, one, you need great players, and two, you need smart players. Yeah. You need guys. I mean, this is not and especially we just broken it all down in the last 30, 40 minutes, which has been a really great breakdown. I'm learning a lot. I mean, think about the changes play to play, each drive, each play could be a different look. You got to have a full, complete understanding of what your role is. And
it's complicated. That's been one of my issues. Well, I have two issues. One is now that people have seen it so much, it becomes easier.
Has it been figured out? Because a lot of people, I do get that comment a lot on the JAKIB chat.
I think certainly it has been figured out in certain places. I mean, Ed Donatel, who's a big guy for years and years and years, really did a poor job, and he lost his job in 1 year. Sean last year, not good. So, if it's not taught correctly and people aren't on the same page, it can look really bad. When it's played at a high level and Vic has been able to do it at the highest level, it can look really good. So
Vic also doesn't have look, Vic Fangio has been around a long time. I'm not going to knock his career, but there are many people who comment this as well. He hasn't won shit. He hasn't won a Super Bowl.
He's never even had a #1 defense. I believe
that's where I'm like, and then real quick, let's just look at this defense. And we're running out of time here. 9:55. Great defensive breakdown from Johnny Mack. But outside of Darius Slay and James Bradbury, there is a lot of youth on this defense. You lost Fletcher Cox. Your whole defensive line is in their rookie contracts, basically. Besides Josh Sweat, and you have Brandon Graham, who's a role player at this point. Your safeties are Reed Blankenship, Sidney Brown, maybe Cooper DeJean. You got Quinion Mitchell.
You know, that's
a lot of young players, though, Johnny Mac.
Yeah, well, and the Eagles made it, you know, Howie called it a mentality off season. They made a big deal about getting 5 Red Star players. They have tried to get players that are have high football IQs for that reason.
Yeah, this is where that Red Star thing comes into play, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't matter with the defensive front for the most part, as long as they're disciplined. But on the back end, and that includes the linebackers, so the back 7, it's really important to get people communicating and get them on the same page in coverage. And yeah, that's going to be a big thing of it. Now, Cooper, very high football IQ. Sidney Brown, very high football IQ. Guys like that, they project well. N'Kobe Dean, tremendously high football IQ. They project well from that standpoint, but you got to do it on the field, and it is just a projection at this point.
There's one more super chat I want to get to from James Carver, who's really a great contributor. James, we do appreciate it very much. Well, a DE isn't really an edge, regardless of alignment. The DE of old Jim Johnson era are not here anymore, but they want that money of a DE. 3-4 is gone because there's no DEs really anymore. Yeah, Johnny Mac and I did talk a lot about that at the beginning of the breakdown of the defense. And for anybody that missed the full, I mean, if you're confused about what Vic Fangio is going to be running, this is the segment for you. I'm going to post out the full segment on the JAKIB YouTube channel.
Yeah, well, depends. Like there's technique. I probably said when we got to go. I probably like nose tackle is 0 technique, or Jordan Davis can shade technique. And then you go out, as I said, in those tight fronts where they start. They generally play 4-eye. They play 5 technique at times, which is when you start talking old school base ends in the 3-4 would play 5. Maybe they go out to 7 occasionally. The wide 9 is famous in Philadelphia. It's not a defense. It's a technique describing edge rushers way out to try to get that speed rush on the edge. So it's all about technique on the defensive line and what technique, defensive front, I'll even call it, what technique you're playing. And the Eagles will start with 0, 4-eye, and 4-eye in the middle. And then it kind of depends on the feel of the game and the feel of the edge rushers, how wide they're going to get. They're not going out to wide 9 when it's 1st and 10. So all those variable techniques are in the defense and they're built in the defense. But the goal on 1st and 10 is that gap and a half. So you don't need an extra body in the box to stop the run. And the goal when you get to 2nd and long and 3rd long is that +1 in coverage at all times. And you know, it's been that way. This will be the 4th consecutive year they played this defensive scheme. But now they have the guy who created it. So in theory, it'll be taught better and it'll be used better in theory, although it's tough to going to be as good as they were in 2022.
Not going to take another commercial timeout. We'll just get to the end of the show coming up here in a second. We went long on the defensive breakdown. I want to thank James Carver one more time for his contributions today to the show. And for everybody in the chat, you guys seem to be enjoying this segment. I'm enjoying this segment. So make sure you drop us a like on the show. Let's push that number today. Let's get up over 150. We appreciate everybody in there. John, I'll end it with one question for you. And this is a Johnny Mac opinion. Is this the right defense to be running? I mean, we just talked about it. He's never had a number 1 defense. He's never won a Super Bowl. He's, you know,
no,
we got the guy that made the defense, but if the defense isn't the right defense, well, who cares?
Look, I've said it a lot. I think it's happened every defense, whether it's Tony Dungy and really it's Monty Kiffin cover 2, Pete Carroll cover 3. Every defense gets copied that's tremendously successful. And the more people play it, the easier it is to digest it. And then you sort of go back in another direction. I think we've we're at that tipping point and have been for a couple of years with Bix. Too many people run it. Too many quarterbacks have seen it. That's my personal opinion. That was my personal opinion, and people that watch this show know that it has been for a couple of years. I think it's easier now. Quarterbacks aren't as confused, and I think it should go in a different direction. But look, again, I go back to the reason this is so popular is not Vic Fangio. It's Sean McVay, it's Kyle Shanahan, it's Nick Sirianni, it's Matt LaFleur, it's Kevin O'Connell. Those are the guys, the offensive guys who said, boy, this is a pain in the ass to deal with. And I think the tide has turned, but that's just a personal opinion.
And is that the answer as to why the Eagles brought Vic Fangio in to give them, counsel on the offensive side of the football? How to beat this defense?
Well, when he was consultant, yeah. I mean,
consulting.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, they love Vic and they have forever. And they played his scheme since Nick Sirianni has gotten here. And now they have him. So at least they have the original and not the Xerox copy, is how I describe it.
Yeah. So that's a good breakdown. I mean, it's definitely a confusing defense. I mean, I'm sitting here, there's terms and things bouncing all over my head. I'm like, but we'll see how it works out. I think this is a good point. I wanted to bring up one last thing before we get out of here. One second, let me find it. And Vic did say this. You have to have the players. You can't blame Vic as not successful because no Super Bowl. To Vic's credit, he did say that at his opening press conference.
Players play. Yeah. Right? Like he said about Jalen Carter.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how we use him. He's going to be good. There's certain
guys. And that's what I liked about it. Mark Farzetta brought that up on our show last week. I like that he's not, hey, my scheme is great. If I can fix everything. He's like, look, this is the NFL. I need great players to win. And I think that's a good mindset to have.
And Jalen Carter to me would be, his best case, Jim Schwartz, if Jim was here, 3 technique, just go. Unfortunately here, he'll play some 3 in obvious passing situations, a lot of 3, but he's going to play a lot of 4-eye. It's probably not the best use of him, but
see that
he's a good player. He's a good player.
That concerns me though, because I think those 2 are what the defense hinges on. You want to get the most out of those players.
Again, that's 1st and 10. He's playing 4-eye.
Right.
If it's 2nd and 12, he's probably playing 3 technique. So that's how quickly it changes.
Yeah. And maybe we'll talk more about that later in the week and what is the best system? What is the best setup for guys like Jordan Davis, guys like Jalen Carter, even guys on the back end like Cooper DeJean and like Quinyon Mitchell. So we'll talk about all that. It's a good episode of Birds 365. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Robert, Underdog, James, Crawley, C24, Niners all damn day, Underdog, anybody I missed, James Carver, C24. Everybody, we appreciate you guys so much in the chat. You guys make Birds 365 a success. So if you could drop us a like, it would be much appreciated if you enjoyed the show today. Johnny Mac, good show today. We'll be back tomorrow. Scheduled release coming up on Wednesday. So a couple things coming, and then OTA start next week. So we're getting closer, Eagles fans. Stay with us all through the offseason. We'll be preparing for the Eagles season just like each and every one of you. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. Johnny Mac, thanks for the defensive breakdown to a defensive dummy like me. I appreciate it. Have a good day, sir.
All right. Thanks, Xander.
Thanks, everybody. See you tomorrow.